It is so great to be with you tonight. Thank you for making the trip here and being a part of this training. I am honored to be here with you. I am so grateful for your willingness to take a weekend, a precious weekend that is, and to really focus on what does it really mean to grow younger in our churches, in our core. How do we help young people really engage in the key to retain in our congregations? And that's what growing young is really about. It really is not actually focused on young people, because it's up to us as adults to really create that kind of space for young people to experience God in a new way. So imagine with me, what does the future of your church really look like? So I want you to close your eyes on this dangerous thing on a Friday night around 7 o'clock. But I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine this with me. Imagine your context, your church building. Imagine your sanctuary filled with young people. Imagine the young people themselves making disciples. Imagine your young people really taking ownership of all that is going on in your core. Imagine that young people are coming through the front doors of your church and not leaving out the back, but staying and being a part of everything that is going on. Imagine the young people giving sacrificially. Imagine the young people worshiping passionately. Imagine that they are getting along with the senior adults. Imagine what it would be that all generations in the core could really know each other, love each other, and serve one another. Can you imagine it in your context? Now open your eyes, because we're growing young for what we believe at Fuller Youth Institute, and what I believe as a Christ follower, what I believe as someone who has seen these principles come to life in a congregation. I believe that it can be done, and it can be true of what you imagine in your mind, in your own context. But before we get too far down the road, Max Dupree, who's a leader, who was a leader at Fuller Seminary, a businessman, would tell us that the first job of a leader is to really define reality. So let me define reality for us a little bit. The reality is that 1 out of 2 young people who grow up in our churches, in our core, who grow up there and are discipled by us and loved by us, the reality is that 1 out of 2 will walk away from growing in their faith right after they graduate high school. Within the first 6 months, they will, what we refer to as, shelve their faith, put it on a bookshelf, whether they are at college or at home, wherever it might be, that they would drift away from God and not engage in their faith journey. 1 out of 2. These aren't just 1 out of 2 young people in terms of all young people. We're talking about the ones that grow up, that we love, that we care for. The other reality is that most Christian traditions here in the U.S. today are shrinking and holding steady at best for a couple rest of the denominations and traditions in the U.S. are continuing to shrink. The reality is it's also pretty generational that we're finding, is that the silent generation, the oldest generation, those who are in their 80s now and in their 90s, that these silent generation folks would say that 79% of them would say that they are followers of Jesus or identify as Christians. I don't know how many of them are really true disciples of Jesus, but at least would identify as Christians. The boomers, they start to decline just a little bit. 74% of them would say that they are Christians. We forget the Gen Xers because that's the forgotten generation. I don't like talking about my generation at all. So we'll just jump all the way down to the millennials because, well, we can blame everything on the millennials. Which, by the way, millennials are somewhere in their late 20s to early 40s now. If you're in that age group, it's your fault. 49% of the millennials would identify as Christians. And then Gen Zers, those that are kind of in the mid-20s, all the way down into 11, 12-year-olds. So they're even lower. Yeah, there's Gen Alpha is the youngest generation. Those that are currently being born. And we don't quite know, we haven't really identified just yet where Gen Alpha really starts. Some places where you will read that Gen Alpha starts at 13 right now, or is at 13 right now. We tend to think that they're a little younger, that they're really about 10 or 11 years of age right now. So just starting to get into middle school. But let's face it, these are all made up demarcations, right? So there's no something that we can say that this is it. But the fact of the matter is, every generation we decline in the U.S. The share of U.S. adults who identify as Christian continues to decrease from 83% to 68% in the span of just 20 years. 20 years is not a long time. And 15% is a huge decrease. You're looking at all of U.S. population. So much so that one young person in our research would say this, that the only time I think about God is when I'm at church. That's not what we want, right? Because we recognize that God is with us every day, every hour. And we want our young people to know God and to serve God every moment of every day. But at Fuller Youth Institute, we don't like to focus on the bad news because we believe that it doesn't have to be this way. What if this isn't the whole story for us? About 20 years ago, we did a research called Sticky Faith, that resulted in the resources that are now known as Sticky Faith. And what we found was that 1 out of 2 young people drifted away from their faith after graduating high school. And we thought that we knew some of the ways in which the churches and Christian adults could help young people to hold on to their faith just a little longer. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we've really made a huge dent in that number since then. But we also realized that it wasn't just about youth ministry that we needed to focus on. Because youth ministry can only do so much. Even the best of youth ministries that I know still only see young people maybe 2 hours a week. If that. If that. And so, how much impact can they really make? And so we begin to ask the question, well, what will it take? What does it take? And so we begin to study the whole church. the whole system of church. Maybe something in the system of the church is broken, or at least needs to be looked at. So coming out of the Sticky Faith research, we began to ask questions around the whole church. And what we found was that churches were already reaching young people well. We found churches all across the country who were already reaching young people well. And so we began to study those churches and say, well, what's unique about those churches that made a difference for young people to not only grow in their faith, but to stay in that church, or at least if they're in town, that they're staying in that church. So we began to really study those, and when we studied those, we came up with this answer, or at least this definition of a growing young church. Churches that aren't shrinking and aging, but are growing and involving and retaining young people. And our age group that we studied specifically was ages 15 to 29, right? But I really think that this can translate into ages 11, which is generally the start of middle school, all the way to probably mid-30s, I would say. That we would find young people in that kind of range. In some churches, it may be 45 are the young church, or the 55 are the young people in that church. So if I could answer this question, then, we can go home, right? Like if I can give you a program in a box and say, take this box home and just do this. And it would be a short weekend. I wish it was that easy. Man, I wish it was that easy. Well, we know it's not. We know it's not. So maybe what I'll do is I'll try to go at it from a different angle. So what we found is that qualities that your church or your core doesn't need to grow young. What we found was that it didn't matter what size of a congregation you had. It didn't matter what location or region of your community or the city or the state or the part of the country. It didn't matter. Because we found growing young churches everywhere. It didn't matter whether you were a new church start, 15 years old, or 150 years old. It didn't really matter what type of denomination. Because what we found was that there were growing young churches everywhere, in all kinds of settings, in all kinds of denominations. And can I get an amen from all the youth workers in the room? Amen. Because growing young isn't about changing youth ministry. Now, let's face it, youth ministry needs to change. Because what we've been doing may not have been working as well as we thought. Right? But more than anything, growing young really is about changing or shifting the church culture. It's about changing the church culture. And when I say church culture, what do I really mean by church culture? What I mean is the way we think. It's our worldview or church view or the way that we see young people. That needs to shift. That needs to change. So as we study these churches or churches that were already reaching and engaging and retaining young people well, what we found were 6 core commitments, or 6 principles that these churches display. These are the things that kind of rose to the top as we study these churches. And they're not any groundbreaking ideas. But what we found was that the young people were prioritizing ways that maybe didn't work in other places. So let me talk about these 6 core commitments. This is what we refer to as the Growing Young Wheel. It shows the 6 core commitments that we found in our research. But what's the most important is what's in the center of this wheel. Because it's not, if we don't have Jesus and if we don't have God's people together, then none of this matters. And so we know that what's in the middle of this wheel is at the center of who we are as Christ followers. And so it's really important that we start there. But not only do we need to look at the center, but we also need to look at what's on the outside. Because context matters. Context of your congregation. Context of where you're located. Your community. What works in one place may not work in the next. Because every core, every body of Christ is unique. It has unique strengths, unique gifts. So context matters. And then we find the 6 core commitments. And starting at the 1 o'clock hour here, it's key chain leadership. It's empathizing with today's young people. It's taking Jesus' message seriously. It's having a warm community. It's prioritizing young people and their families everywhere, and then being best neighbors. Those are the 6 core commitments that we have. But you see a little dotted line that goes off to the side, and it says growing old. What we found was that prioritizing young people everywhere was something that we found in every church that we studied. That when young people were not prioritized, churches continued to get older. You could do all the other core commitments well, but when young people were not prioritized, I would argue that you can't really do the other core commitments very well if the young people are not prioritized in the church. But what we found is that if we didn't do that well, then we continue to grow older. So when we entered into this research, we were looking at, well, how did these churches that were reaching and retaining young people, how did they impact the young people that they were reaching? That was our focus. But what we also found was that young people absolutely impacted those congregations. Right? That those congregations experienced vitality in a new way. In a way that was different than those churches that were not going there. So they brought vitality to the whole church, and not just a segment of the church, but the whole church. So for the next 24 hours, or less than 24 hours, that we will look at what does it mean to be a growing young church. And we're going to take each of the core commitments and go a little deeper. Of course, you have the book, and you'll see our research in there. If you look in if you're how many of you are research generalists? Anybody? Yeah, I am. I guess that's why I'm really do this too. But in the back, in the appendix, you'll see our research process and what we went through and how we did the research. Because we want to be as transparent as we can be, because let's face it, any research can say whatever it wants to and twist it in a way that we want the results to be. So you'll see the research in the back, in the appendix, and what we went, the process that we took. So I encourage you to look at that when you are reading through the book. So key chain leadership. Key chain leadership is, by the way, we don't have to go in order of the way that I just described the growing young wheel. It has no specific reason for that order. What we did, though, with the first one, the key chain leadership, is probably the most practical one that you can put into use right away. When we started this process of the research, we didn't quite expect that leadership would be something that people kind of pointed to so often. When we were doing focus groups, and as we were having interviews with different people, every time we talked to them, they could have been older members of the congregation, they could have been middle-aged and young people. It didn't matter that 3 out of 4 of them pointed to the church's leadership as one of the keys to a church being growing younger. But here's the myth, right? The myth is if we could just find the right person, if we could just find the right guy or a right girl, if we could just have someone who has all the charisma in the world, then that's going to solve all of our issues when it comes to young people. And that's what we've done typically, right? We've gone out and said, hey, who can relate with the teenager the most? Who's going to draw young people in? And that was always our thought process of, hey, if we just have a young, hip leader, in fact that I just had said hip, makes you know that I'm not that person any longer. Never was, really. We can just find the right person, but we know that might work for a little while. But then as soon as that person leaves, what happens? Young people go out the door right away. So we kind of always have an ebb and flow of depending on the personality of the person that's leading that area of ministry, and we're always at the mercy of that. And so what we found in our research is that we have leaders of all ages, of all types, that were impactful in helping young people really engage and retain in the church. And one of the leaders we ran into was Stretch. Stretch is his nickname, but he goes by Stretch. And Stretch told us this story as he was growing up. When he turned 16, like many of us who are older, when we turned 16, the first thing that we did was go where? To the DMV, right? So that we could get our license. It doesn't happen nearly as much now for young people. But our first thing that we wanted to do was go to the DMV so that we could get our license, because that was a sign of freedom. Right? And so Stretch told us the story that when he turned 16, the first thing he did was go to the DMV so that he could get his driver's license. And after he got his driver's license, his dad looked at him and said, hey, congratulations, son. Here are the keys to the family car. You can take it anywhere you want today. And Stretch looked out for a minute, and Stretch said, well, I don't know where to go, but I like hanging out at the church sometimes, so I'm going to go there and see what's happening. So Stretch decided that he would go and check out what's happening at the church. And as he was pulling into the parking lot of the church, the preschool director of that church recognized that was Stretch, and Stretch must have just got his license because, well, she hadn't seen him drive before. And then she got an idea. She said, hey, Stretch, congratulations, happy birthday, and I'm glad that you got your driver's license. But you're probably going to need some money to put gas in that car, right? And Stretch is like, well, yeah, I probably will. And she said, well, do you want a job, a part-time job? You can come here after school and you can help us close up every day. And Stretch is like, sure. And so she said, the preschool director said, well, just stay right there. She ran to her office. She reached into her desk and pulled out the keys to the church and handed those over to Stretch. Now he has the keys to the car. Now he has keys to the church. And he thought, wow, only the important people have keys to the church. He didn't realize that really everybody had keys to the church. when he was working at the preschool. And he said, "Hey, Stretch, I can't really pay you, but I need your help. This vending machine that we have in the church, you know that this was way back in the day, that we could stock our own drink machines, said, hey, I can't really pay you, but I need your help to stock the drink machine. What I can do, though, is give you this key to the drink machine. You can have all the soft drinks you want." And for a 16-year-old, he's like, keys to the car, keys to the church, and now keys to the vending machine. Man, I'm a rock. Stretch said one day he had a particularly bad day at school. And so he had a few moments while he was working. And he went into the sanctuary. It was dark. It was quiet. And Stretch said, I sat down and I just began to talk to God about my day and what was happening. He didn't say that he heard God audibly. But what he did say is that he knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was the voice of God. And the voice of God asked him, "Hey, Stretch, you like being here, don't you?" Stretch said, "Yeah, I like being here." And he would tell us that. He said, "Well, it used to be. You're going to be here for a long time." And to this day, he's the pastor of that church. And key chain leadership is really about inviting young people into areas of leadership, to entrust entrust some agency back to our young people and give them responsibilities that matter. That young people need access to keys. When we say keys, we define it as the trust, power, and access of leaders who carry the potential to empower young people. And guess what? Every one of you have keys. You probably have physical keys to the building, but you also have keys, access of leadership. Right? In theory, it might be fun for a teenager just to learn to drive on their own, right? Like we would take keys, say, hey, take these keys, throw it at the young people and say, you know what? You go and learn how to drive by yourself. You don't have to take driver's ed. You don't have to do any of that. Just go drive. And yet we do exactly that in the church sometimes, don't we? We throw keys at young people and say, hey, I'm tired of doing it, you do it. Without any training, without any support. And we wonder why when they fail or when they don't show up or when they don't do something that they were tasked to do, then we get disappointed. We say that there are three types of key leaders. There's the keyless leaders, and these are typically your young people. Young people who have not been given the opportunity to take on leadership. So they are the keyless leaders. Then there are the key hoarding leaders. I'm sure your congregation has none of those. Every one of you probably knew exactly who you were thinking of right there. And if you didn't, you might want to look in the mirror. Ooh. Actually, I think there's another type of leader, and it's the key lending leader. Key lending leaders are those that's like, all right, I'll try this out. But they have this little stretchy thing on their key on their belt, and they'll lean it and they'll loan it to the young person. And as soon as they mess up, or as soon as they don't follow through, or don't do it exactly the way that they would have done it, and they take those keys right back. And then there are the key chain leaders. And these are leaders who truly are seeking to open doors for young people, to find ways to empower them, to share the leadership, and to mentor them, to bring them along and say, hey, do this with me, and teaching them how to lead. So maybe there's an idea there that maybe what we need to focus on is empowering young leaders to envision new doors with new keys. Because guess what? Young people know so much more than many of us about what might be possible in today's world. There are new doors that we've not thought about in church that young people can help us to imagine and to unlock, if we would just give them that opportunity. Because the enthusiasm of young people isn't your church's problem. Right? It's the very solution that you've been looking for. It's the very solution that you've been looking for. I want you to do this with me. I want you to imagine again. I want you to think about who's ready for keys in your context. You all have pens and notebooks there. Write that person's name down. Write that young person's name down right now. Or if there's multiple young people that come to your mind, write their names down. Who's ready for keys? Who's a young person who has shown promise, who has shown some initiative, who have talent that they don't even realize? Think about it. And I want you to write those names down right now. Let's take a minute to write those names down. Take out your phones. If you have their number right now, I want you to do this right now. If you have their number, I want you to text them and say, hey, I'm thinking about you. I love you, and I care about you. You have so much potential. Just shoot them a text right now. No, really, right now. If you don't have their phone numbers, then that's what you're going to do as soon as you get back. You're going to get their phone number. Got it? Everybody good? Now let's spend a little time praying for this young person, for these young people. So I'm going to ask that we just spend a minute praying for the young person that's come to your mind. As the Holy Spirit has spoken to you and brought this name or faces to your mind right now. Pray for them. Pray for their family. Pray for an opportunity for you to invest some time, some of your time into them. Oh God, the faces and the names that you brought up, the ones that you're speaking to us about in this moment, right here, right now. God, may you provide the way, the opportunity for us to invest ourselves into their lives. God, that you'll open up the doors for us to have conversations, meaningful conversations, for us to be able to learn about them and learn from them. That we might be able to build a relationship that matters. That they will know that not only that we care about them, but that we believe in them. God, as we think about investing in someone else, I also remember the people that invested in my life when I was young. The people that took their time and invested themselves in me. People like JT and CK and Frank and Sandy and so many others who saw something in me even before I saw something in myself. God, we give you thanks for those people in our lives. And I pray that you will place it on our hearts, that you will help us to be the same for those young people that are around us today. And we give you thanks for what you're going to do in the days to come. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Tomorrow morning and into the afternoon, we'll talk more about the other 4 commitments. But I think it starts here. And what I want us to do is I hope that this is getting you to be really thinking about, well, how do we really do this? What do we need to do? What do we need to change? Who do we need to invest in? Because the information is fine, right? But if it's just information, then that's not going to be transformational. So we want it to be transformational for their lives, for our congregations. God, may it be so.